First of all, when using the simple zone stamp, ensure that it's loaded into the library manager. This is linked as an LFC file, and that contains the zone stamp itself as well as some additional text files, which we'll look at momentarily. We also need to make sure that the zone stamp is enabled in the zone categories. For each zone category within the project, select the simple zone stamp. Here I've applied this zone stamp to this particular zone category, so we'll look at the settings for that. The first page of the simple zone stamp settings gives you the different zone stamp fields. By default we have two fields. The first row gives the room name and the second row gives the area. To add an additional field, we can click Insert Row, and that will add that field to the list. We can then define which fields are in that row. For example, I could select field 1 and change that to custom text and add a prefix. And then for field 2, we can add the volume. For any numeric based fields that's based on a volume, area or measurement, we can change the units. They're currently displaying the default units, which will take the project preferences. We can change that to other volume based units, area based units or linear units depending on the field type. In this case we've got square meters. We could change the value to square feet, or use the custom units to define a number of decimal places. Separate controls are available to control whether or not the units are displayed. And if they are displayed, whether or not superscript units are included. To delete a row, simply select it in the list and press Delete Selected Row. Separate controls can be used to define the text style. So there's two types of text style. Each row can be defined as either a header or as body text. We then get controls to define the header's text and body text separately to give separate text sizes and styles. For example, I've made the header bold and underlined. And a display from field, which will determine whether or not a text field is displayed based on the scale. By default, all text will display from 1 to 200. However, if I select the area field here and select 1 to 50, that will display at a 1 to 50 scale, but if we were to change the scale to 1 to 100, that would be hidden in that particular view. The second page of the simple zone stamp settings includes the zone number and zone name, as well as a subtitle which can be used for a second name, description or custom text, and the finishers. For the zone name field, we get a drop-down menu with various presets for the domestic, commercial, education and healthcare types. Here you can see as I change between these different values, we get different presets. These lists can be customized by editing the text files, and there'll be a separate movie on how to do so. We can also type in custom names. And once you've typed in a custom name that doesn't appear in the current preset list, that will be added to the custom room names at the bottom. The zone stamp will remember the last 5 names that have been entered. The zone calculations can be used to calculate the occupancy and cost based on area, either calculated or measured areas, and volume. Again, these can be included within the fields. The third page of settings gives you control over the zone number format and the story ID. So if I add the zone number to the first field, The number of this zone is currently Z02. We could include the story ID and a separator, which is 0 in this case. And if we had a hot link, we could include the master ID of that hot link. We can also choose to take the ID from the story name. If you have a uniclass ID as part of the story name, as in the UK template, we can separate that from the name. For example, we'd have 00 for the story ID. The fourth page of settings gives you control over the text style, which we've partially covered, and also the text box. So you can define the anchor point of the text box, in this case the center. You can choose to wrap the text and define the size of the text box that should be wrapped. And to include a frame or border. And if you are using a frame or border, you can also extend that by a particular distance and chamfer it. The settings for the frame and background are controlled on the next page, which lets you define the line types and pen colours. The zone stamp also includes options to include IFC data. I'm going to insert a new row and select IFC data as the field. This will now give a drop down with all of the IFC data that's tagged within the zone itself. For example, I could click IFC type. The IFC type is IFC space. If I had a second IFC data field, we could include the IFC ID of this particular zone. And if you add any additional IFC data to this zone stamp within the tags and categories, they will also appear within the drop downs within the zone stamp fields.